I'm going to ask Lydia Dockery Long to come up and lead our invocation, and she's got a little something she wants to pass out to the council members afterwards, I think, and a little something. So y'all can get something back to you pretty quickly, and if you have places that you've heard that are in need of water or those type of things, you might want to make a list of those too and bring them when you come. So can everybody start working toward a list? I guess it's a good wish list, so that we can kind of get some things tied down and kind of get a plan put in place so we can get that filed before the end of the year. Okay. All right. Planning Commission recommendation zoning text amendment added to the agenda by zoning administrator. Is Roy?
Yeah, it's okay.
Sorry, Roy. Do you want to discuss that or?
I think you have a recommendation for you.
Well, I'm trying. I don't think the computer's working for me. And everything in my packet's not in order. The Blue Ridge Planning Commission met on July the 19th, 2016. As a result of the hearing, the following recommendations are submitted for your consideration. Ada Street LLC made a request to rezone a certain tract of property located on Ada Street from R2 to C2. The subject property is bordered on the northern line by Davis Street, the western line by River Street, and the eastern line by Ada Street. The southern boundary of the subject property is owned by Ada Street LLC and is presently zoned C2. The Planning Commission made the following recommendations. 1, that as a result of failure to get a second to a motion to approve the request to rezone the subject property from R2 to C2, that the request be denied. 2, that the mayor and council consider changing the text of the Blue Ridge zoning ordinance so as to allow as a conditional use a hotel, motel, extended stay type of facility in the C1 limited commercial district.
Good evening, council. Of course, I'm David Sykman, city attorney, and I'm glad to be here tonight to be with y'all. Y'all probably realize that, of course, we have been talking about the Ada Street LLC rezoning for about 18, 19, maybe 20 months now, and have gone through one lawsuit, and that lawsuit is still partially pending. And then in May of this year, May 11th of 2016, they filed a second rezoning application. That rezoning application went up to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission presented that recommendation to you. And I'll tell you, I may need more than 5 minutes. It takes me 5 minutes to say my name. So
Give me just a second. Let's go ahead and make the motion.
I'll make a motion to allow more time.
Do I have a second? I'll second. Rather than interrupt you in the middle of something. Sorry. All in favor?
Thank you. I think part of the challenge on this particular rezoning application is that it literally lies in a transitional area. That sort of on one side of the property you have residential property, on the other side of the property you have commercial property. So it's sort of a border property, and border properties typically create more issues because you got to think about more factors in that. You got to think about how it affects the adjoining residential properties, as well as to give the owner a reasonable use of his property. And as y'all probably know, under zoning, you're not necessarily entitled to the highest and best use of your property. You're only entitled to a reasonable use of your property, considering other properties in the neighborhood and the impact of a rezoning on those neighboring properties. And of course, your zoning ordinance has other factors besides that. One being future land use map, which of course indicates that this property should be residential. So in looking at this, I think council and the planning commission both have sort of struggled with what's a reasonable use of that property that would not negatively impact the neighboring residential area. And like I said, that's not unusual in border or transitional properties. Those are always almost come down to a judgment call by the council as to what's a reasonable use and what would impact or not impact those adjoining residential properties. So in looking at this situation and hearing what the property owners want to do and hearing the concerns of the council, I had come up with some recommendations that I wanted to talk to y'all about, one of which the Planning Commission and the mayor read out their recommendation, did not recommend that this property be rezoned to general commercial or the C2 zoning designation, and did recommend that it be rezoned to C1. And C1, as y'all probably know, is a limited commercial district, and this commercial district encourages professional service establishments and limited residential uses oriented to busy streets where more intense commercial uses begin to abut residential neighborhoods, which, you know, to me is almost the definition of this property as we discussed it for the last year and a half. It says, as such, this district is considered a transitional district and encourages the conversion of existing residential dwellings to viable, low-traffic, low-impact commercial uses while allowing some residential uses to remain as a part of the district. And he goes on to talk about the new construction should be done in such a way not to affect the character of the adjoining neighborhood. So when you're considering what would be a reasonable zoning designation for this property, C1 does appear to fit our factual circumstance. The other good thing about a C1 zoning district is that it does not allow as great or as an intense commercial use as the general commercial does. And it does so that you minimize the impact upon the adjoining residential area of that commercial use. So again, just looking at the policy behind what you use a limited commercial district for, it seems to fit this situation. So my first recommendation to you is that y'all consider rezoning the 8th Street property that they brought for rezoning by their May 11th, 2016 zoning application from medium density residential, which is R2, to limited commercial, which is C1. Okay, if you rezone it to the C1, then at that point, that would end their zoning application and they, you know, would take whatever action they feel like they need to take. Then my second recommendation to you is that you consider the proposed text amendment. And I put some thought into this and wanted, hopefully everyone has a copy. If everyone doesn't have a copy, I draw the copy for everyone if you need it. Does anyone need a copy?
What about the applicant?
Sure.
This is the first time you ever get to say anything.
Two more of us.
He doesn't know that.
So the way this would work is actually going to be sort of a three-step process. That one, you would rezone the property to C1, and that's the first step. And at that point in time, their rezoning application is over, except if they take it further together as they see fit. Then secondly, I would recommend to you that you consider a zoning text amendment to the limited commercial district to allow a hotel or a motel under certain conditions that are outlined within the proposed text amendment. And then the third step, just to give you the overview, is after that's passed by the council, then Ada Street can come back and apply for that conditional use to have a hotel or motel under the conditional use under a C1 zone. So I wanted to quickly sort of go over the proposed text amendment. Basically, section 1, number 1, it talks about the table of permissible and conditional uses. As you know, our zoning ordinance has a table where it shows inherently allowed uses for each zone that we have under our zoning ordinance. And basically, the change would be that for a hotel or a motel, there would be a C under C1, which would allow it to be a conditional use, and then it would have to meet the additional requirements under the proposed 13.2-28. The ordinance goes on under number 2 to outline what are those additional requirements. And the first additional requirement under subpart A is that a hotel or motel would be limited to 2 stories in height. I wanted to note that in the ordinance for C1, that's consistent with what is already in C1, that there's a 2-story height limitation already in C1. So we would be treating that requirement just like everyone else. Sub D, that they have the same licensing, inspection, and taxation requirements of all other hotels and motels. Section C, that they present a site plan in order to apply for the conditional use or a building permit. Sub D, again, this is just spelling out under our zoning ordinance as it's currently written, there are standards or guidelines for consideration in the grant or denial of a conditional use. And that just basically says in the grant or the denial of a conditional use of a hotel or a motel that y'all will consider those standards that are already in the ordinance. Number C, and this is where you're kind of having to make a judgment call that in a transitional area that borders residential property, what should the maximum number of units be for that hotel or motel? What's a reasonable use insofar as that intensity of use that would not negatively impact the adjoining residential property? And since I didn't know what a quorum wanted to do, I left the maximum number of units blank, but was going to recommend to y'all somewhere in the range of 10 to 16 units. If a person wanted to rezone to R3, which is high density residential, they have a maximum unit capacity of 10. So if you start with 10, then you're giving them at least what they could have gotten under R3. If you go up over 10, then actually they're doing better than R3. And of course, that's subject to the property having public water or public sewer. Doesn't have public water, doesn't have public sewer, and they got to meet the health department requirements. And it's also that unit capacity is on a per acre basis. So if someone comes in with 10 acres of property that they want a C1 hotel on, and y'all say 10 units per acre, they could have a 100-unit hotel because they have 10 acres. That section goes on to say if you've got less than an acre, then it's just a proportionate. Again, if y'all say 10 units is the maximum capacity, and they have a half acre, they'd be able to have 5 units. Just proportionate based on the size of the property. Again, that's not unusual in that if you go back and look at R1, R2, R3, the number of units you have is dependent upon the size of the property that you have, and you're limited to that square footage as to the number of units you can have. So again, our ordinance is being consistent with what we've done in the past. And then you also have the situation where you can have fractional units. Let's say, for example, you have 0.55, and let's say you're going to allow 16 units per acre. Well, when you do the math of 0.55 times 16, comes out to 8.8. So, it's not like you have 8/10 of a room. The way the text amendment is currently written, you round down to the nearest whole unit. I thought that was appropriate because, again, under the limited commercial, you're trying to enact regulations to protect those neighboring residential areas. And so you don't want to encourage more intense usage, you want to encourage a reasonable use. So you round down if you have a fractional unit. The facility under the conditional limited commercial conditional use of a hotel or motel, the maximum rental stay by the same customer will be 21 consecutive days. They got to meet under sub G the definition of a hotel or motel under the ordinance, except we're going to exempt them out of a turnover of a different registered guest every 5 days. Again, to give them a reasonable use, I thought it was fair to extend out the number of nights that a guest could stay because they're going to have a smaller number of units. Again, for parking, this comes straight out of C1, that one parking place for each rental room and one parking place for every 2 employees. Got to meet the minimum screening and buffer requirements of Article 14. Again, we're incorporating what our ordinance says. Again, I would note though that considering the standards of your ordinance, you could increase, if you need to, those buffering requirements. In order to be considered for that conditional use of a hotel or motel, at least on 2 sides of the property, the adjoining property's got to be zoned as commercial property, and that does not include the railroad right-of-way as commercially zoned property. An issue that's come up in other areas, I think in Dalton, they have people that have come in and said, I want a hotel, or I want a motel. And Dalton's allowed it, and they built a greater number of units than if they had come in and said, I want to build a condominium. And then, after they get their hotel built, a year later, they come in and say, I want to switch from a hotel to a condominium, and thereby they, circled around the residency requirements by doing that 2-step process. Well, under subpart K, if that's attempted, it allows them to use those units as residential dwelling units, but then they got to lower the density down to, either the density that, of a residential district that adjoins the property. Like if it's R2, they gotta meet the R2 density. If they have two sides, one that's R2 and one that's R3, we give them the greater density of the R3. They don't adjoin any residential property, then they gotta lower it down to R3, which is our maximum under our residential district. So, so that again helps protect the neighborhood. And then it requires in consideration the size and the characteristics of the lot, that garbage containers and parking areas and electrical generator and loading service areas, to the extent that they can, you know, it'll depend on the property and where it's located and how it's shaped, that they try to site that away from the residential areas or screen. And then in sub M, sorry, all this is, I knew the first 16 code, but then okay, again, sometimes people play games. Under sub M, if you own a piece of property and you own property that adjoins it that's zoned commercial, and you say, I'm gonna build a hotel on the adjoining commercial property, I'm gonna build a hotel on the C1 property. Well, if you build it as one unit, then you're restricted to the maximum density allowed by the C1 conditional use. So whatever y'all said, they would be limited to that. Of course, if they own commercial property, it's already zoned commercial and it allows a hotel, they can put whatever they want on that commercially zoned property because it's already zoned commercial. But they gotta build it as a separate facility. They gotta have a separate switchboard, separate front desk, separate parking. They can't lip over or encroach over into the C1 property from the other commercial property to serve that hotel. So again, that helps sort of prevent people from playing games. Again, number N, just talking about to the extent possible the facility is designed so that its architectural characteristics are consistent with those of the area and adjacent properties. That's straight out of the C1 zone. And then sub O, basically what that says is that these are the minimum requirements that you gotta meet. Council, in the exercise of your legislative discretion, considering the standards within the ordinance that are already there, can impose additional requirements. And again, you know, you gotta think about that this is a text amendment that applies citywide, and then depending on the specific property that comes before you, there may be a need for property-specific conditions to minimize the impact on adjoining properties. So I'm proposing to you that you would do a second, make the maximum number of units under the C1 conditional use hotel or motel, and then that you do a third motion, just sending this proposed text amendment back to the planning commission to go through the regular zoning process to have the ordinance be amended and have this be included as part of the ordinance. And so, that's my presentation. I'll be glad to, discuss any of it with you and discuss the proposed test. Questions, comments?
Does anybody have a C1 that you're aware of that has all those extra little pieces to it?
I think there's at
Is there
least,
another city that does, I mean, that's a little,
I think there is at least one piece of property in the city that would meet, or could meet, potentially all these, requirements.
Where is it?
On 8th Street.
well, that wasn't really my question. Is there another city that has taken the C1 and added all the extra to it? I just wondered how it worked out for that city. That was my question. Is there a city that has done this and it worked?
I'm not aware of another city that's done this, but of course, I'm not aware of every zoning ordinance in the state of Georgia, so, you know, that's a hard question.
Just curious. I didn't know if you had gotten information from somebody else. That's just impartial. Just curious.
You know, that's potentially 400 ordinances, and that's even a lot for me to have knowledge of.
But it is only conditional use for a hotel motel, that's not on everything, that's just on a hotel motel.
That's correct.
I just know that they recommend not doing conditional uses usually in zoning classes and things like that. So that's why I'm asking, is it working for somebody? I'm just curious. I'm not,
Well, there's conditional uses all throughout the ordinance,
I don't know. Just not
typically done.
Conditional uses are pretty standard in all zoning ordinances, because there are some uses that are appropriate with reasonable conditions being imposed. You know, the difference is that we're dealing with a limited commercial C1 zone, so we've attempted, by way of our legislative discretion, to go ahead and deal with what conditions are needed to protect those adjoining resident properties. And there's nothing wrong with that, you know, hopefully every city council will do that.
Anybody have any questions? Anybody have a motion?
I'll make a motion, we approve this request as it was originally submitted for a C2.
Do I have a second? Do I have a second? Okay, for lack of a second, that motion dies.
Madam Mayor, we submitted that C2 request under a constitutional challenge. We've now been turned down, so the constitutional challenge goes into effect. And we will go to court and let the judge decide who we should be C2.
Okay, all right, so, anything else?
Also, Mayor, just for the note, the planning commission approved our original submission for C2
First time.
the first time, and I want to put on record, they did not come back and recommend, now this is your planning and zoning commission, right here, this is a gentleman who brought it the first time we met, and did not say that he recommended any restrictions under C1, he didn't make any of those
I
recommendations.
think we have that on record from the first time, so I think we all know that. I think that was in the minutes and everything
This
before,
was brought
so.
up by the city attorney at the last time when we attended.
Thank you,
Okay.
thank you for your time, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do I have anything else?
So you can read that.
Well, I think you're making a text amendment to your C1 zoning, right? You're not actually approving Ada Street as a C1. You're making either the text amendment to your zoning, is what,
My recommendation was 3 motions. One of the motions was.
we didn't follow that very well then, David, I'm sorry.
Okay. My first recommendation is that there be a motion to approve the rezoning of the Ada Street LLC property from medium density residential R2 to limited commercial C1. Period, end of motion.
So that doesn't have to go back to the planning commission if you did that.
They made their recommendation to you, so,
So we're not doing the text amendment and then sending it back to the planning commission.
well,
Hey, Roy's behind you.
I have a second. The other part that I think you should do is go ahead and rezone the property to C1. And then do a second motion to do the text amendment, or to have the text amendment go back to the planning commission to go through the normal zoning process. And as part of that motion, you either do it by a third motion or just include it in your motion. You stick into the text amendment what you think the maximum density of that conditional use hotel or motel should be. Now, whether it's 8 units, 10 units, 12 units, 14 units, 16 units, whatever y'all think is reasonable. I think I told one or more of you that I thought a range of 10 to 16 units was reasonable. But, you know, that's something that you in your judgment would have to decide. So really, I'm recommending to you 2 motions. That one, you rezone the property to C1, stop. Second motion would be that you send the text amendment back to the planning commission for the normal zoning process with the number of maximum units you want in the ordinance. And then if that ends up passing the council, Ada Street can come back and apply for that conditional use. So, 2 motions.
Okay, and I want to be clear though, that the zoning board did not recommend this be C2, and they really didn't even recommend it be C1.
But I would like to point out they did recommend the last time that it be rezoned C2, which they originally asked for. So why did we not follow the recommendation last year before the lawsuit? To me, this is an attempt for you all to cover yourselves and allow them a hotel without giving them the C2.
No, this is not an attempt, this is an attempt to.
So that's exactly what's going on here, and you can't fool anyone.
Let's go back to the, do we have a motion on
I'll
the
make a
floor?
motion that we rezone the property C1.
I'll second.
All in favor? All opposed? Okay.
And I'll make a motion that the proposed text amendment to the limited commercial zoning district be sent to the planning commission to go through the normal zoning process, and that the maximum number of units in the proposed text amendment be 10 units.
Okay. Did you have something you wanted to add to that, Roy? Was that where you wanted it?
I just want to clarify, I do not believe that the planning commission recommended a C1 zoning category, but the mayor and council does have the authority to zone the property to C1. So I don't recall that being a recommendation from the planning commission. They did recommend that council consider the amendments to allow this conditional use hotel motel. I don't recall an actual statement that there was a recommendation to rezone the property to C1 to the city council.
And I was going to be
We
correct.
do have that.
So, okay, so he inserted that, so you've got your motion on the floor. Do I have a second on Angie's motion? Do you want to add something to your motion?
I can add it afterwards.
Okay.
I mean, not to the motion, I just want to say something else.
A comment or added to your motion?
No.
Your motion was finished.
My motion is finished.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll say.
Do you want her to restate that, just in case you're clear? Okay. All in favor?
How many years?
I don't,
That in that motion?
I don't think that was in that
She
motion.
said 10.
Oh, you did say 10.
That's per acre, Mayor.
Now, if we can talk right now, they still have their C2 property that they can put up.
He's
to.
made a second motion, so he seconded it, so it was up for vote, so you had 3. Bruce, you did raise your hand, correct? Okay. But it was 10 units, so
Yes.
3-2 it passes. It yours can either go yes or no.
I thought after you did a motion and a second, you had discussion.
We usually we have
And
it.
normally, we've been doing it opposite, but that is the way we do it in our policy.
Okay, you have something else?
So we can discuss this. I know what you're thinking, you're wondering, but the C2 that he already has, he is stated to go to up to 18 units. I don't know if he can or not, if he can get that done. If he does that in conjunction with what we're allowing on C1, then that would be 23, 24 units in a residential area.
We haven't had a discussion. What they do.
You can't hear it? Is that what you?
Can't hear a word of the discussion.
Can you talk into the
We
microphones?
discuss it, let's hear it.
So the whole, what I was,
But the buildings are gonna be, I don't mean to be a problem, but the building's gonna be 2 stories,
Yes,
so.
Me 2 stories.
you can have 2
In
stories.
C1.
So the
He can do whatever is allowed in C2.
problem comes in, is having adequate parking for the size of the lot he's got.
But it does have a parking restriction in there too, so he would have to meet that. And it says, something that was in there that I had a question about, employees, a parking space per 2 employees. So is that on each shift, you consider how many employees, or is that employees total? So if you had 10 employees, have you gotta have 5 parking spaces for employees? But I assumed it would work out, whatever, so, I don't know. Do you know the answer to that, Angie? I know you don't talk about
it
it.
makes sense to me when I read it, but I mean.
If this
I would
has,
say that comes straight out of the language that's already in your ordinance.
so if you had 10 employees, even though they all don't work at the same time, would you have to have 5 parking spaces available for employees, but you only had 3 on shift at a time? Just curious.
It would be however it's been traditionally or administratively interpreted in the past, in that language is already in your ordinance.
Okay.
And Harold, the whole thing here is if we zone the C1 and we don't have this conditional use, then he can't use it as a hotel motel. So, but if we have the conditional use, then he can use it as a hotel, but he's got to meet all these A through 10. So, it's not that, like Mr. Simon said, the C1 is a transition between the business and but if we don't allow him to use it, for the purposes of his project, then, I mean, do we just want to zone it C1, or do we want to have it zoned C1 and allow him to have some use of it for his project? And that's what we're trying to get at.
Or you could rezone it C2, which is what he applied for, and the zoning board recommended previously, and allow him to put what he would put according to the zoning.
Well, the majority of this council respects the residential, the people who want the residential.
So that's exactly what you could have
Okay, can
done.
we go back to the
If
vote?
I may, I would like to clarify that the minutes of the planning commission that were sent to the council this afternoon, page 7 says, Thomas K. I'll make a motion for C1, given the staff analysis conditions, to allow a conditional use in C1. So,
So Mr. Seifman, why are we choosing to listen to them this time when we didn't the last time? I mean, is there a difference?
they are a recommending body.
But, and they recommended the last time that it be rezoned
Okay,
C2, so
okay.
why would we take the
let's
recommendation
run
this
this
time
back.
and not the last time?
If you're gonna advocate your legislative discretion to the planning commission, then, we shouldn't have council rule on anything.
Well, we
But
did,
they are just a recommending body, it's up
Yes.
to the council
Yes.
to decide.
You're the one who brought it up, so.
Okay, so did that answer your questions,
Now,
Harold?
when it does come back, you abstained from the last time on the rezoning, so.
Are
Yeah,
we
that's
ready
what we
to
said
move
that.
forward?
But Mr. Simons has,
Amy, can we move forward?
Mr. Simon has put it in writing that I can vote, so I have that in
Yeah, you
the
take it
text.
right.
Yes.
Okay.
Ladies, not
Okay.
arguing.
Harold, your vote. C1 with conditional use. Angie, do you want to restate that?
Okay. I make a motion that the proposed text amendment to the limited commercial zoning district be sent to the planning commission to go through the normal zoning process, and that the maximum number of units in the proposed text amendment be 10 units.
Okay, and then Rodney seconded it. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, all right, thank you. Okay.